Okay, and welcome to this demo of Nik Software's new HDR package, HDR Efex Pro 2. And we'll be using these 5 images, this bracketed series of exposures shot in Istanbul a couple of years ago. And let's just, for fun's sake, have a quick look in Lightroom's map module at where these actually were shot. The building you see in the background over here in the middle is the famous blue mosque, and this is the little bench in the foreground that you're seeing over here. And so the image was shot from this way into this direction. Now, I'm using Lightroom as a host package, but you can use also Aperture or Photoshop as a host package for HDR Efex Pro, and the latter will even give you the advantage of using it as a smart filter. If you purchase HDR Efex Pro separately, you can use it as well in Lightroom, in Aperture as in Photoshop. If you buy it as part of Nik Complete Collection bundle, then depending on the bundle you buy it in, you will be able to use it in Lightroom only, in Aperture only, or in Lightroom, Photoshop and Aperture. Okay, we're using Lightroom as a host package here, and it's important to know, if you're new to HDR Efex Pro, that you won't find it next to the other Nik plugins, such as, for example, here in the Photo Edit In menu, I have my Sharpener and my Silver Efex Pro and my Viveza, but HDR Efex Pro doesn't wind up over there. Instead, you will have to look for it in the File Export menu. So let me just select my 5 images over here, and I'll choose File, Export, and after having installed the software, it will pop up right here under the Export to dialog, and you can find it over here. Okay, so I'll click Export, and I'll be presented, or will be presented, with one of the first novelties in HDR Efex Pro 2, and that's a screen that allows you to very clearly pre-process your images with regards to HDR post-processing. And you can do a couple of things over here. You can make sure you can check or uncheck your alignment. You can check or uncheck chromatic aberration, which you could also, of course, already have done in Lightroom. And then this is the most important novelty, the ghost reduction, which has been dramatically improved in HDR Efex Pro 2. Now, for those of you who don't know what ghosts are actually things or persons or elements that wind up in one frame and not in another. The typical example is people walking through your different exposures and winding up as ghosts in the merged image. So in order to get these ghosts out of the final image, we can apply some ghost reduction. And there is one thing you should know: you should never apply ghost reduction when it's not necessary, because you'll tend to get adverse results. So in this case, it's very handy to use the new loop function over here and to actually go and have a look if it's necessary to perform ghost reduction. And in this case, typical areas that might need ghost reduction are trees and leaves of trees that might have moved a little bit across the different exposures. So I don't really see a need for ghost reduction, so I won't apply it, because okay, this lets me set up everything as a starting point, and once I'm happy with this initial pre-processing, then I can click on the Create HDR button. And what we will see here is that the overall interface looks very much like HDR Efex Pro 1, which is a good thing, because I kind of liked the simplicity of HDR Efex Pro 1. You will have your presets on the left, and HDR Efex Pro 2 is, just as its predecessor, one of those packages that really lets you explore all options. You can go very realistic, photorealistic, for example, with these balanced settings over here, rather realistic, or you have even the really realistic presets like the one over here or this one, and you can switch all the way across to completely surreal and over the top, like for example this one over here. This is the typical grungy HDR look, which I'm not particularly fond of myself, but I know it's popular with a lot of people. So you have all these looks inside of the same package, and basically what these presets do, they just put the sliders found on the right hand side of interface to certain specific settings. That's all they actually do. But the nice thing is you have a visual preset of what they do, so that's really really handy. Okay, other than custom or the standard preset, you can save any combination of the settings on the right as a custom preset. You have also the option of importing other people's presets. And finally, another new feature is the history browser, which we also already have in Color Efex and Silver Efex Pro 2. So this lets you track back to your different settings. Okay, now let's go back to the preset library and let's choose something simple to begin with. And one other thing I want to mention is this option here. You have the little star icon in front of a preset, and if you click on that star icon, you actually add it to your favorites. And so you have a tab over here, the favorites tab, and this is like a sort of like some kind of short list of your favorite preset. So let me apply this one, and as I said, the only thing a preset does is put the different values or the different sliders on the right hand side to certain values. And this is one of the things that Nik has done very well, I think, in version 2. They have simplified the whole HDR rendering process to something more understandable, and therefore something you will more likely experiment with, in my opinion. And the basic sliders are these two over here, the tone compression, which is in fact determining how much of the HDR effect you get. So from -100, this is actually no tone compression. If I increase the tone compression, we will get detail in the sky, detail everywhere, which is typical for HDR. Then second of all, we have the method strength slider, and this one over here actually deals with the combination of these three different variables. And as you can see, they are in the interface, they look kind of like sliders, but they are really discrete options alongside a graphical interface, really. And there are three different combinations. The first has 4, the second has 5, and the last has 6. So that's 4 times 5 times 6. You have about 120 different combinations of all these settings that will allow you to define a certain HDR method, and then the method strength slider will determine how strong that method is applied to your overall image. So it's really the interaction of this sub-panel that lets you determine the actual HDR look of your image. So depth is, well, as the name implies, depth goes from being off, as it is here, to subtle, normal, and strong. And it has kind of to do with the three-dimensionality that you can put into your image. So let's go with subtle over here. Then detail goes from soft, which actually blurs the image, and you get this soft painterly HDR kind of look, over realistic, which is the one we'll choose here, over accentuated, and here you can already start to see this typical kind of grungy look, which gets even more so in the detailed and the aptly called grungy look. So here we get more to the pictorial kind of HDR, which some people might like, but in this case I'm not very fond of. So let's go back to realistic for that one. And finally, the drama slider lets you, as its name implies, apply some kind of drama, some kind of more punch to the image. And it goes from flat over natural, deep, dingy, sharp, and grainy. Okay, so let's go back to the natural look. Now, after having set the global look, then you can tweak your image in the tonality part of the interface. And here I can set my exposure, shadows, highlights, and all of this, of course, is done in 32-bit. So if you can, you're better off doing it over here than doing it later on in the post-processing pipeline. And of course, something that is always very popular in creating that HDR look is the structure slider, and here it's also present. Now, I kind of like the overall look over here, but one thing I'm not digging too much is the green. The green looks a little bit too fluorescent in my taste. So I can do two things. I can either go to the color section over here and dial down my saturation somewhat, but that will of course dial down the saturation in the whole image. Now, frankly, I kind of like the look over here, but what if I would only want to dial down the saturation of the green in the trees? Well, that's where my control points come in handy, and this is something that's unique to all the Nik software plugins, and it is the only HDR package that has this kind of extensive local control. So you just put a control point on the area you want to affect, in this case the tree, and then you have the option of locally controlling all these effects: exposure, contrast, saturation, structure, black level, white level, temperature, tint, and even the strength of the method. So which I find very, very cool is that you can locally dial down or dial up the method strength. So you can, if you have, for example, a face in an HDR processing and you want to dial down the HDR effect a little bit locally, well, you can do so with a control point. Now here I want to use the control point to locally dial down the saturation, so let me do so. And as you can see, this really brings back the saturation in the tree, okay, to a more human level, let's say. And I can easily duplicate this control point and set it on this tree as well. And to duplicate the control point, you just Alt drag it to a new destination. Now let me add another control point. Suppose I want to make the sky a little bit more looming, a little bit darker. Then I can just put a control point in the sky and dial down the exposure locally, and you see my sky gets a little bit bluer, a little bit darker. And I can even, if I want, also dial down the saturation a little bit. Okay, that's fine. Now also what we have is, as if this isn't already enough to finish off your image, we have some other real finishing options, and one of those is the option to add a vignette to the image. Now for example, I kind of like what this is doing here, the lens 4 effect, and if you twirl these icons open, you have even more control over where you're putting your effects. You have the option of putting the center of the vignette somewhere else, which I find kind of cool and which not very many other applications have. You can dial down the amount. In this case, I will put it a little bit subtle. What's also new, and I can't apply it on this image because my horizon isn't flat, but for some landscape images you have the option of putting in a graduated neutral density filter, and this is really cool again because you can do so in 32-bit as opposed to 16-bit later down the post-processing pipeline. Now finally, what you can also do is play around with some levels and curves, and you have presets over here. And as you can see, you can achieve quite dramatic results. Now in this case, I actually kind of like this look over here, the bright contrast, and it also shows me that I really need to clean my sensor, but that's something I have to take care of afterwards. Now, having chosen this bright contrast look, I might need to revisit the exposure settings slightly, so let me do that, and voila. Now, if I like what I see, I can always, save this out as a new custom preset. So in this case, I'll just hit the plus button and give this a name, for example, HDR Istanbul, which will save it to custom settings, and I can apply this look then later to another image. Now, going back to my history, for example, you see here the entire history list that I have applied to my image, and I can even go and have, if I switch over to before and after view, this is my default tone mapping. This is what I've made of it, and by dragging the yellow bookmark icon, I can go back to any previous step to compare if I haven't gone overboard somewhere, if I still like the last effect, or if I want to go back to a previous step. So this is also a very welcome addition to HDR Efex Pro, the ability to have a history. Okay, let's suppose I like this effect over here. Then all I have to do is hit the save button, and this will render out my TIFF and will bring it back into Lightroom, and then I can take care of those annoying dust spots that my HDR processing has suddenly brought up in my image. And this is the final image after some dust spotting in Lightroom. Now, if you like HDR Efex Pro 2 or the complete collection, then I have some very good news for you. First of all, in the Nik USA web shop, if you live in the USA or a country that the USA Nik web shop caters to, then discount code more than words 15 will entitle you to a 15% discount. If you live in Europe or in the EMEA, then the discount code that you see on your screen, and which I won't even try to pronounce, will entitle you to a 10% discount. These discount codes are valid for any Nik plugin that doesn't already have another discount applied to it. And for the European discount code, please make sure to visit www.nicsoftware.com/coupon in order to get your discount. Okay, that's it. I hope you liked this demo and stay tuned for further videos. Bye bye.